It is a principle of diplomacy that one must know something of the truth in order to lie convincingly. I have just finished The Hunt for Red October, the first Jack Ryan book written by Tom Clancy, and this is a lot of firsts for me. This is my first espionage thriller. This is my first fictional Cold War book I've ever read, and most importantly, this is my first Tom Clancy book I've ever decided to read. And I know that's not necessarily like a big deal, but growing up, as I did in the early 2000s, I was exposed to a lot of Tom Clancy stuff, like the early 2000s was kind of really his time to shine. Tom Clancy video games, Tom Clancy movies, and my dad was really into Tom Clancy. I mean, he read literally everything this man wrote and then some. So this has been a long time coming for me to finally get around to reading a Jack Ryan novel or a Tom Clancy novel. And I kind of wanted to start at the beginning because The Hunt for Red October is his first. It's one of his most famous works. There's the movie, and I really wanted to finally get into reading spy thrillers and espionage thrillers, and I figured this guy is probably the best place to start. And I'm happy to report that I really enjoyed myself. Now, if you've never heard of The Hunt for Red October, it is a espionage thriller featuring Jack Ryan, who is our protagonist. And it's essentially the United States and USSR are trying to hunt and find this nuclear submarine called the Red October, which is defecting from the USSR and trying to make it to the United States. And that's the entire plot of the book. I mean, there's some subplots with some politicians and, CIA kind of black sites and analysis. And there's there's some dogfighting in here between, planes and stuff. There's, some naval combat. There's some just general spy thriller stuff. But the main plot is around hunting this Red October, which is this kind of silent submarine. It's got this new technology that makes it really hard to track. And submarines are already historically very hard to track, I guess. And it's just this very kind of grounded Cold War thriller. It was written and released in 1985, so that kind of gives you an idea of the politics of what was going on during this time. And for me, I was pleasantly surprised by how much I enjoyed this, because I didn't really know what to expect. I've never read Tom Clancy. I've never seen any of the movies based on his books. The only time I've ever touched Tom Clancy anything was I've played like 3 hours of Wildlands, which is one of his Ghost Recon games, and it's like very loosely based on like his work. So I don't have a lot of experience with Tom Clancy. I don't even have a lot of experience with thrillers or espionage stuff. For me, spy espionage, that's James Bond. That's the stuff I grew up with. I grew up with Daniel Craig's James Bond. So going into this, I had this expectation of like, I just hope to enjoy it, essentially. Besides that, I had nothing else. And I did. I totally enjoyed myself. And the reason I enjoyed myself was, as much as I love my fantasy and science fiction, as much as I love my fantastical worlds and my really long books and my, rap sheet list of characters and continents and names to keep track of, sometimes I want just a simple, straightforward story that is just action-packed, well-paced, and just like based in some sort of reality. And that's exactly what I got from this book. This book is 19 hours long on audio, which is pretty short compared to what I normally read. I just finished The Count of Monte Cristo, which is like 3 of these put together. That's what I normally read. I usually read slower paced stuff. I usually read stuff that is less grounded in reality. And this is the total opposite of that. This is a super, I would say, fast paced novel with a plot that is really thrilling to read. There's a lot of politics here. There's a lot of spycraft here. There's a lot of, military speak. so to say. You know, there's a lot of just, oh, like the CIA's got to work with the Navy to figure out this problem, and they go to this guy, and you know, like if you've seen like a 2000 spy thriller, you know what I'm talking about. You know what I mean? Like it's very much that. And the way that this is written is just, it's very clear cut and dry, but you know, I really just enjoyed that. Like this is just such a well-paced, you know, put together novel, just front to back. I felt like I didn't have to waste, there was no time wasted here. All the plots here, all the subplots, all the characters, it was just a well-rounded novel. And like the characters here are very grounded, in my opinion. You know, Jack Ryan is not James Bond. He's not John Wick. He's this dude who was a former Marine, and you know, he's a historian, he's a family man, and you know, he's an analyst for the CIA, which is, you know, a desk worker. You know, he's not like some serious international spy. He's not 007. So him kind of being swept up in this it's like a normal everyday dude for the most part, and getting put in a scenario that is not normal and everyday. And I really like that. And the entire, like, you get multiple points of view from American soldiers and USSR soldiers, and all of them are very grounded. You know, they're talking about their families, their kids, their hopes and their aspirations. And from the USSR, you kind of get to see their perspective of, you know, what would it maybe be like to live in, you know, 1985 Russia. Not a great time necessarily, but you kind of get that. And there's even this banter towards the end between American and USSR soldiers and the difference in culture. And I don't know, like, it's just like, this is not necessarily like what I call like an upbeat novel, because there is death in this. There is, you know, that tension between the United States and the USSR. You know, there is that like kind of very subtle threat of nuclear annihilation, because that's what the Cold War was. It was just like one button press away. But there is like this kind of like just everyday man style of writing where, you know, it's got this kind of positive view on the United States, and you know, very like Reagan centric politics, like, but at the same time, it's also like, you know, when you see how the American soldiers treat the USSR soldiers, it's dealt with dignity, which is surprising, you know, considering when this was written. You know, it's at the height of the Cold War, or nearly so. You would expect them to just demonize the USSR. I'd expect Tom Clancy to demonize the USSR, and that's just not what happened here. Like, he really made these soldiers and all these men feel like very real characters. And I don't know. It just, I was genuinely surprised at multiple times just like how well-rounded this book is. It does action very well. It's very grounded. You know, when someone gets shot, it's not, hooray, I shot that guy. It's, oh man, I killed that person. I didn't want to do that. You know, when somebody dies, it's very serious. You know, there is all of that. You know, there's this very grounded political atmosphere with the CIA and even with the KGB, and kind of how they're two sides of the same coin and all of that. Like, it's just a very well written, mostly grounded espionage thriller. And if you like that kind of thing, and you've somehow never read The Hunt for Red October, I recommend it. The action's really good, the pacing's really good, I thought the character work was really good, I really like the dialogue, and you know, I like the naval stuff. You know, I'm not necessarily someone who goes out of their way to read, you know, nautical fiction. I like pirates, but beyond that, I don't know much about the Navy or the history of the Navy, or submarines for that matter. But this feels very well researched. This feels like it was done by a man who really knows his stuff, and he takes it seriously. And you know, it's not pulpy. It's not like, oh, it's John Wick trying to find this nuclear submarine. No, it's like, it's very serious, but it has some lighthearted moments that like leaves off the tension a little bit. And I think it's a well done book. That's it. It's just very well done. I give it an 8.5 out of 10. I'm looking forward to more of these books. I think it's only up from here with Tom Clancy, apparently. You know, a lot of people told me that this is one of his worst novels, which if that's true, I look forward to reading the rest, or most of the rest.